At 19, Leo had already lost his father, his home, and what felt like the last warm sliver of his mother's regard. All in the space of a single, brutal year. All he had left to show for it was a faded photograph, a single worn leather work glove that still held the ghost shape of his father's hand, and the deed to a derelict powerhouse on the forgotten edge of town. A crumbling brick behemoth he'd bought for $1 at a tax auction nobody else even bothered to attend. His new stepfather, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, had laughed a short, sharp bark of a laugh when Leo brought the paper home. The town's only developer, a man named Thorne with polished shoes and an even more polished manner, called the place a liability, a tombstone for a dead industry, worth less than the cost of tearing it down. But what nobody knew, what couldn't be seen from the road or measured on a surveyor's map, was that the great, cold heart of the building, a monstrous, silent boiler coated in a half-century of dust and rust, held a promise forged in fire and grief, a story waiting for the right hands to uncover it. That, though, comes later. First, there was the leaving. The finality of it wasn't in the shouting, because there was no shouting, not at the end. The finality was in the quiet. It was in the way his mother wouldn't meet his eyes, her gaze fixed on a spot on the kitchen wall as she polished a glass that was already clean, her knuckles white. It was in the way his stepfather, Richard, stood with his arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe, a posture of casual ownership that included the house, the air inside it, and the woman polishing the glass. The words, when they came, were simple, delivered without heat. "It's not working, Leo," his mother said, her voice thin. "You need to find your own way now. You're a man." He was 19. A man. He didn't feel like a man. He felt like a loose thread on a sweater, one good pull away from unraveling completely. He packed a single duffel bag, the same one his father had used for weekend fishing trips. He put in a few changes of clothes, the worn copy of a book on mechanical engineering his father had given him, and the photograph of the three of them, taken years ago at a county fair, all of them smiling into the summer sun, a life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. As he zipped the bag, his fingers brushed against the leather glove he kept on his nightstand. It was stiff with age and stained with the memory of honest work, the palm worn smooth, the fingers curled slightly as if still holding a tool. He tucked it deep inside the bag, a small, solid piece of a world that no longer existed. Richard had watched him, silent, and then stepped aside from the door. Not a goodbye, just an opening. Leo walked past his mother, who still had her back to him, her shoulders trembling almost imperceptibly. He wanted to say something, to break the terrible, sterile quiet, but the words were stuck somewhere in his throat, a hard lump of grief and confusion. He just walked out the door he had walked through his entire life, let the screen door slap shut behind him, and didn't look back. The days that followed took on a gray, shapeless quality. He slept on a friend's couch for a week, the springs digging into his back, the feeling of being an intruder a constant, heavy presence. He spent his days walking the town, trying to find work, but there was little to be had. He was just another pair of hands in a place that had too many already. It was during one of these long, aimless walks that he first really saw the Powerhouse. He'd passed it 1,000 times before, of course, a hulking ruin down by the river, its smokestack a jagged tooth against the sky. The town had grown away from it, leaving it to the mercy of weather and time. The windows were shattered, the great sliding doors were rusted half open, and a forest of weeds had consumed the old access road. It was a place of endings. But that day something made him stop. He looked at the brickwork, the high, arched windows that spoke of a different era, a time of pride and solid things. He saw the way the morning light cut through the broken panes, illuminating swirling dust motes like constellations in a dark, forgotten galaxy. He felt not decay, but a kind of deep, abiding silence, a stillness that seemed to absorb the noise of his own troubled mind. He learned about the tax auction from a notice tacked to the corkboard at the post office. A single sheet of paper yellowed at the edges. The property was listed as Parcel 734, described in cold, legal terms. Industrial structure, non-operational, significant structural concerns. The minimum bid was $1. It was a formality, really. The town was just clearing its books. Everyone knew Thorne wanted the land, but he was waiting, patient as a spider, for the city to condemn the building so he could get it for the cost of the demolition he would have to perform anyway. No one else would bid. It was a fool's purchase. Leo went to the town hall on the day of the auction. The room was mostly empty. A few clerks, a bored-looking official, and Mr. Thorne himself, sitting in the back, observing. He wore a crisp gray suit and looked entirely out of place, an emissary from a cleaner, more profitable world. He nodded at Leo, a small, dismissive gesture. When parcel 734 was called, the auctioneer barely looked up from his papers. Minimum bid, $1. The silence stretched. Leo felt his heart pounding. He felt Thorne's eyes on him, amused. He raised a hand, his voice barely a whisper. $1. The auctioneer glanced at him, then at Thorne, who simply gave a slight shake of his head, a flicker of a smile playing on his lips. Sold, the auctioneer said, banging a small wooden gavel with a sound like a breaking bone. To the young man in the back after, Thorne approached him, his hand outstretched. His grip was firm and dry. Son, I'm not sure what you think you just bought, but I'd be willing to take that liability off your hands. Give you $100 for your trouble. A quick profit. Leo looked from Thorne's polished face to the folded deed in his own hand. No, thank you, he said. I think I'll keep it. Thorne's smile tightened. Your choice, but a piece of advice. Some things are meant to be left for dead. He walked away, leaving Leo standing alone in the echoing hall, the owner of a ruin, the king of a pile of bricks and rust. He didn't know why he'd done it. It was an impulse, a defiance against the quiet, sensible surrenders that had defined his life so far. It was his. That was all that mattered. It was the only thing in the world that was his. The first time he walked onto the property as its owner, the scale of his folly hit him with the force of a physical blow. The chain-link fence was rusted through in places, hanging in sad, jagged scallops. The ground was a minefield of broken glass, rusted metal shards, and weeds as thick as his wrist. The air inside the main turbine hall was cold and damp, smelling of decay and pigeons and wet earth. It was vast, a cathedral built for machines that were long since gone, ripped out for scrap decades ago. All that remained were their concrete pedestals, like ancient altars, and the ghosts of their vibrations in the thick, dusty air. Light streamed down from the high, broken windows in dramatic, hazy shafts, illuminating the debris on the floor. It was overwhelming. He stood in the center of the great hall, a single small figure in a cavern of industrial death, and felt a profound, crushing loneliness. He had traded one form of homelessness for another. He sat down on one of the cold concrete plinths, pulled the leather glove from his bag, and slid it onto his right hand. The fit was wrong, too big, but the familiar scent of oil and leather was a comfort. He remembered his father telling him, his voice a low rumble as he worked on their old truck. Everything looks like a mess at the start, Leo. You just find one corner, one small piece, and you make it right. Then you find the next piece, find one corner. He looked around. His eyes settled on the massive steel sliding doors. They hung crookedly on their tracks, jammed open by years of rust and debris. That was his corner. He would start by closing the door. Took him 3 days. 3 days of shoveling out hardened mud and rusted metal fragments from the tracks, of using a long steel pipe as a lever, his muscles screaming in protest, moving the colossal door an inch at a time. He worked from sunup to sundown, fueled by cheap sandwiches and a stubborn refusal to admit defeat. On the third afternoon, with a final, groaning shriek of metal on metal, the door slid shut. It plunged the hall into a dim, dusty twilight, but it was a solid, declarative sound. Closing. A beginning. He felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a year. Bride. That evening, he unrolled a cheap sleeping bag in a small, glass-walled office that overlooked the turbine floor. It was the cleanest, most sheltered space he could find. As darkness fell, the powerhouse transformed. The sounds of the wind whistling through the broken panes became a kind of music, a low, mournful hum. The moonlight painted silver rectangles on the concrete floor. It was not a tomb. It was just sleeping. He was not the only living soul there. On his second day, he'd seen it. A flash of scruffy, tan fur disappearing behind a pile of old conduits. Later, he left out a piece of his sandwich. The next morning, it was gone. He started leaving food in the same spot every day. Finally, one evening, as he sat watching the dust settle, the creature emerged. It was a dog, a mutt of indeterminate breed with a matted coat and one ear that flopped over. It was also missing its left hind leg, holding itself up with a practiced tripod-like stability. It watched him with intelligent, wary eyes, then limped over to the food, ate it quickly, and retreated, not into the shadows, but to a specific spot. It hopped up onto the wide metal platform that encircled the base of the main boiler, a monstrous, multi-story cylinder of riveted steel that dominated the far end of the hall. There, the dog curled into a tight ball and lay its head on its paws, facing the boiler's sealed iron door as if on guard. It was a strange, unwavering vigil. Leo started calling the dog Cinder, for its dusty coat and its home in the heart of the old fire-breathing beast. The dog never came close enough to be touched, but it became his silent companion, a fellow survivor in the forgotten place. His presence in the Powerhouse did not go unnoticed. The town began to talk. He'd hear snippets of it when he went to the diner for a hot meal, his one small luxury. Marge, the owner and sole waitress, would pour his coffee without him having to ask. She was a woman whose age was impossible to guess, with sharp, kind eyes and hands that were never still. "Heard you bought the old Blackwood place," she said one morning, setting a plate of eggs in front of him. He flinched at the name. "Blackwood. Silas Blackwood," she clarified, wiping down the counter. "He was the last caretaker. Lived in that little office of yours for 30 years after the plant shut down. The town just let him stay on. Kept an eye on things." Leo had an image of a lonely, broken old man, as much a ruin as the building he inhabited. "People said he was strange," Marge continued, her voice lowering slightly. "Kept to himself. Always tinkering. Saw him once hauling a big gear out of the river on a chain hoist he built himself. Said the river didn't have no right to it. But he wasn't strange. He was just quiet. A quiet man in a loud world." She paused, her gaze distant. "My husband, Frank, he passed 10 years back. The day after the funeral, I found a new latch on my back gate. Perfectly fitted, oiled and all. Never asked for it. Never saw who did it. But I knew. It was Silas's work. He did things like that. Fixed things. Never sent a bill, never wanted a thank you. He used to say, 'A debt is just a story that isn't finished.' I guess he felt he owed the world something." She looked at Leo, a long, appraising look. "He would have liked you, I think. You've got good hands." He respected good hands. Marge's stories began to change the way Leo saw the Powerhouse. It wasn't just an empty shell. It had been a home. The layers of dust weren't just neglect. They were the accumulated silence of a man's solitary life. He started to work with a different kind of attention, a sense of respect. He wasn't just cleaning a derelict building. He was tending to someone's legacy. He found small signs of Silas everywhere. A workbench with tools neatly arranged in shadowboard cutouts, a shelf of carefully labeled jars of nuts and bolts, a series of complex diagrams sketched in chalk on a slate wall, detailing a water purification system powered by a small, handmade water wheel in the river culvert. This was not the work of a man letting a place die. This was the work of a man keeping a heart beating, however faintly. His days fell into a rhythm. Wake with the sun, share a piece of his breakfast with Cinder, and then work. Clearing debris, patching the roof with salvaged sheets of tin, reglazing windows with cheap plexiglass. Each small act of repair felt like an act of defiance. He was not just fixing a building, he was fixing himself, piece by broken piece. One afternoon, Mr. Thorne paid him a visit. His polished black car seemed alien against the backdrop of rust and weeds. He didn't get out, just rolled down the window, a condescending smile on his face. "Still playing king of the castle, son?" he asked. Leo didn't answer, just kept sweeping a patch of concrete. "Look," Thorne said, his tone shifting to one of strained reasonableness. I'm prepared to make you a final offer. $10,000. For the deed. That's more than this scrap heap will ever be worth. I'm building a series of luxury condos along the riverfront. Prime real estate. This is the last piece of the puzzle, and frankly, it's an eyesore. You're holding up progress. $10,000. It was more money than Leo had ever seen. Could buy him an apartment, a used car, a new start, a way out. He thought of the cold nights in the sleeping bag, the constant ache in his muscles, the gnawing uncertainty of his future. He looked at Thorne's clean, manicured hands on the steering wheel. Then he looked back at the Powerhouse, at the high arched window he'd spent the last week carefully reglazing. He looked over at the boiler platform, where Cinder sat, watching Thorne's car with a low growl. "No, thank you, Mr. Thorne," Leo said, his voice steady. "It's not for sale." Thorne's smile vanished. "You're a foolish boy. You think this is a game? I have friends on the town council. There are ordinances, safety codes. A building this derelict can be condemned. And when it is, the city will take it and you'll get nothing. I'm offering you a gift. Take it. It's not for sale," Leo repeated, turning his back and resuming his sweeping. The sound of Thorne's car speeding away, tires spitting gravel, was loud in the quiet afternoon. The threat hung in the air long after the car was gone. Condemned. The word echoed in the vast space. He now understood he was in a race not just against decay, but against a man who saw the world as a spreadsheet, a world where a place like this, a life like Silas Blackwood's, had no value at all. That night, sleep wouldn't come. He lay in his sleeping bag, the developer's threat turning over and over in his mind. He was 19, broke, and alone. He had no lawyer, no influence, no resources. Thorne was right. He was a foolish boy. He had picked a fight he couldn't possibly win. Frustrated and restless, he got up and started to walk through the darkened main hall, the beam of his flashlight cutting a nervous path through the shadows. He found himself drawn, as he often was, to the boiler. It was the soul of the building, a silent iron giant. Cinder was there, of course, in his usual spot, a furry sentinel. The dog lifted its head as Leo approached, thumping its tail once against the steel deck plating. It was a small gesture, but it felt like reassurance. Leo ran his hand over the cool, riveted surface of the boiler. He had spent days cleaning the exterior, scrubbing away decades of grime, revealing the maker's plate. Allegheny Steam Works, 1928. It was built to last, a monument to a forgotten kind of craftsmanship. He'd studied the schematics he'd found in Silas's office, trying to understand its inner workings. The firebox, the water tubes, the pressure gauges. It was a masterpiece of engineering. He shone his light on the access door where Cinder lay, the one that led to the firebox. And then he moved the beam along the lower courses of the massive cylinder, tracing the lines of rivets. And that's when he saw it. An anomaly. A detail so small he had overlooked it 100 times before. Most of the firebox was lined with thick, heavy-duty refractory bricks, pale and grooved from years of intense heat. They were held in place by a dark, crumbling mortar. But in one section, a perfect rectangle about 3 feet high and 4 feet wide, the bricks were different. They were a slightly darker shade of tan, their edges sharper, less worn. And the mortar was a clean, pale gray, expertly applied but clearly much, much newer than the rest. It made no sense. Why would anyone patch a single, non-structural section of firebrick in a decommissioned boiler with such meticulous care? It served no purpose. It was a repair that wasn't a repair. He ran his hand over the section. The bricks were smooth, solid. He pushed against them. Nothing. He tapped one with the handle of a wrench he carried in his back pocket. The sound was a dull thud, just like the other bricks. But it nagged at him. It was a question without an answer, a piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. Silas Blackwood was not a man who did things without a purpose. Every nail, every weld, every sketch he'd left behind had a clear, practical logic. This was different. This was a secret. He looked at Cinder, who was watching him intently, his head cocked. The dog had chosen this exact spot as his sanctuary, his watch post. It wasn't random. Animals knew things. They felt things. The dog wasn't guarding the boiler. He was guarding this spot. A shiver, unrelated to the cold, ran down Leo's spine. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that whatever story this powerhouse held, the next chapter was waiting for him behind that wall of mismatched bricks. The next day he started. He took a thin crowbar and a hammer and went to the anomalous section of brickwork. Cinder sat a few feet away, watching every move, a silent, attentive supervisor. Leo felt a strange sense of trespass, as if he were about to break a sacred trust. He took a deep breath and inserted the tip of the crowbar into the fine gray mortar line. He tapped it gently with the hammer. A chip of mortar fell away. He worked slowly, carefully, trying not to damage the bricks. He didn't know why, but it felt important to be respectful. Took hours. The meticulousness of Silas's work was his enemy now. The mortar was strong, the bricks set perfectly. His shoulders ached, and his hands were raw, but he kept going, driven by a relentless curiosity. Finally, the first brick came loose. He wiggled it back and forth until he could pull it free. He shone his flashlight into the dark hole. He was expecting to see the thick steel shell of the boiler. Instead, he saw nothing but more darkness, a hollow void. His heart began to beat faster. He worked with renewed urgency, prying out the rest of the bricks one by one, stacking them neatly on the platform. Behind them was not steel, but a second wall, constructed of cinder blocks, also neatly mortared. Silas had built a wall within a wall, a hidden chamber. In the center of the cinder block wall was a small, recessed steel door, like one you'd find on a safe. It had no handle, no visible hinges, and no lock. Just a small, perfectly round hole in the center, about the size of a dime. He was stumped. He pushed on the door, pulled at its edges. It was seamless, immovable. Frustrated, he sat back on his heels, staring at the strange little door. What was the key? He thought about Silas, about the way the man's mind seemed to work. Everything had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. He thought about the workshop, the neatly labeled jars, the specific tools for specific tasks. The answer wouldn't be force. It would be something precise. His eyes scanned the workshop area, the scattered remnants of Silas's life. He searched for an hour, looking for a key, a lever, anything that might fit the small hole. Nothing. He went back to the boiler, defeated, and sat down next to Cinder, stroking the dog's rough fur. The dog licked his hand, then nudged its head against the wall of the boiler, just to the right of the hidden door. Leo shone his light where the dog had indicated, and there, almost invisible against the dark steel, was a single out-of-place bolt head. It wasn't a rivet like the thousands of others. It was a hexagonal bolt, and it was shiny, as if it had been turned recently. He retrieved a wrench from the workbench. Fit perfectly. He turned it, and with a low, satisfying click, the small steel door on the inner wall swung inward. The air that drifted out was cool and dry, smelling not of damp and decay, but of old paper and oiled steel. He shone his light inside. The chamber was small, about the size of a closet, and completely lined with thick, tarred canvas to waterproof it. And it was full. Stacked neatly on wooden shelves were a series of heavy, fireproof metal boxes, the kind used for military documents or bank storage. There were at least a dozen of them, each stenciled with a single letter of the alphabet. He reached in and pulled one out. It was heavy, solid. The latch was simple. He lifted it and opened the lid. He was expecting money or gold, something with obvious, measurable value. But what he saw was something else entirely. The box was filled with small, exquisitely crafted objects. A tiny, perfect replica of a steam locomotive, its moving parts all functional. A delicate, articulated bird made of polished brass and copper. A set of hand-ground lenses for a telescope. And each object had a small, yellowed card tied to it with a piece of string. He picked up the little locomotive. The card attached to it read, "For Thomas Miller, who lost his own. Christmas, 1982. Paid in full." He picked up the brass bird. "For Sarah Jenkins, whose singing stopped. April, 1995. Paid in full, he opened another box, and another. It was the same. Dozens upon dozens of objects, each a marvel of miniature engineering and artistry. Each tagged with a name, a date, a brief, cryptic reason, and the same 3 words, paid in full. There were also ledgers. Small, leather-bound books filled with Silas Blackwood's neat, compact handwriting. He opened one. It wasn't a record of money, but of debts. Not debts owed to him, but debts he felt he owed to the town. Martha Gable, for the kindness of a hot meal, winter of '78. Repaired the water pump on her well, Sheriff Brody, for looking the other way when my truck registration lapsed. Fabricated a new brace for his daughter's leg. It was a secret history of the town, a lifetime of quiet, anonymous reciprocity. This was the Powerhouse's true purpose. It wasn't a place of industry. It was a workshop for repaying kindness. It was Silas Blackwood's heart, hidden away in a vault of brick and steel. Leo sat there on the cold metal platform for a long time, the beam of his flashlight illuminating the incredible, secret treasure. The air thick with the weight of one man's profound and hidden grace. He was not the owner of a ruin. He was the guardian of a legacy. The weight of that realization was heavier than any of the boxes. He finally understood what Marge had meant. A debt is just a story that isn't finished. And he had just stumbled into the library where they were all kept. If you have stayed with this story this far, stay a little longer, because what happens next is the part one have been waiting to tell you. It is the part where a boy who had nothing finds out he has been given everything that matters, and the part where a town that has forgotten its own heart is about to be reminded of it in the most unexpected way. The discovery changed the rhythm of Leo's days. The work of cleaning and repairing the Powerhouse continued, but now it was imbued with a different purpose. He was no longer just claiming a space for himself. He was honoring the space that Silas had created. He handled the old tools with a new reverence. He looked at the chalk diagrams on the wall not as faded scribbles but as sacred texts. He felt Silas's presence not as a ghost, but as a teacher, a silent mentor whose lessons were written in steel and wood and stone. He spent his evenings in the small office, carefully going through the boxes and ledgers under the light of a single battery-powered lantern. Cinder would lie at his feet, a warm, breathing anchor in the vast, quiet building. Each object told a story, a beautifully crafted fishing lure for a man who had lost his job at the cannery, a complex clockwork music box for a family whose house had burned down, taking all their possessions with it, a perfectly balanced hammer that had simply appeared on the workbench of a young carpenter struggling to start his business. Silas had been the town's silent benefactor, its secret angel, using his incredible skill to mend not just objects, but lives, in small, unseen ways. The phrase paid in full was on every tag. It wasn't about money. It was about balance. It was about restoring a kind of grace to a world that often felt graceless. Leo felt like an archaeologist uncovering a lost civilization, one that valued quiet craft and mutual obligation over noise and profit. But the shadow of Mr. Thorne's threat remained. One morning, a crisp official notice was posted on the Powerhouse gate. It was a condemnation order from the town council, citing numerous safety violations and declaring the structure an imminent danger to public welfare. It gave him 30 days. 30 days to bring the entire, massive building up to modern code. An impossible task that would require hundreds of thousands of dollars, or see it demolished. The order was signed by the head of the council, a man whose name Leo had seen in one of Silas's ledgers. For Councilman Peters, for his son's tuition check that went missing, a new wallet anonymously returned. Thorne had one. He had used his influence, weaponized the law, and was now poised to get exactly what he wanted. Despair washed over Leo, cold and numbing. What was the point of all this? What good was uncovering this beautiful, secret history if it was all about to be reduced to a pile of rubble? He felt the familiar urge to run, to take what little he had and just disappear. He could sell the contents of the boxes. Some of the objects were surely valuable as art or antiques. He could take the money and start over somewhere else, somewhere no one knew him, somewhere he didn't have to fight a battle he was destined to lose. He walked back to the boiler, the condemnation notice crumpled in his fist. He looked at the open chamber, the boxes stacked neatly inside. He thought of Silas, spending 30 years in this place, alone, meticulously crafting these tokens of gratitude, asking for nothing in return. To sell them felt like a profound betrayal. It would be turning Silas's legacy into the very thing he had seemed to reject, mere currency. Cinder nudged his hand, whining softly, as if sensing his turmoil. Leo sank to the floor, his back against the cool steel of the boiler. He was just a kid. It was too much. He didn't know what to do. He decided to pack one more box away, the last one, which he hadn't yet opened. It was smaller than the others and lighter. He pulled it from the back of the chamber. Unlike the others, it wasn't stenciled with a letter. It had his own name on it. Leo. His blood ran cold. That was impossible. Silas Blackwood had died 2 years before Leo had even known this place existed. He fumbled with the latch, his hands shaking. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet cloth, was a single object. A brand new leather-work glove, a perfect match for the worn one his father had left him. And underneath it was a thick, sealed envelope. With trembling fingers, he picked it up. His name was written on the front in Silas's neat, angular script. He broke the seal. The letter inside was written on heavy, cream-colored paper. The ink was a dark, faded blue. If you are reading this, it began, then you are the right person. I don't know your name, so I have left that for you to fill in. But I know your character. I know it because the only person who would have the patience and the heart to get this far would be someone who understands that the value of a thing is not the same as its price. Leo's eyes filled with tears. He read on. I used to watch you, the letter continued. You and your father, working on that old truck in your driveway. I saw the way he taught you, the way you watched his hands. I saw the care you took. The world has too many people who want to tear things down. It needs more people who know how to build, how to mend. People with good hands and a quiet heart. This place, this powerhouse, it was my sanctuary after I lost my own family in a fire a long time ago. The people in this town, they were kind to me in my grief. They didn't pry. They just left a bag of groceries on my step, or filled my truck with gas when I was low. Small things. This was my way of saying thank you. I paid my debts. But a debt is just a story that isn't finished. I am an old man now. My hands are not as steady as they once were. My story is ending. If you have found this, it is because you are meant to be the next part of the story. A place isn't the bricks, it's the purpose. The purpose is yours now. Don't let them scrap the story. Tucked into the fold of the letter was a small, heavy, hand-forged key. At the bottom of the page, Silas had written one final line. P.S. The key opens the old maintenance locker in the turbine hall. There are blueprints inside. Not for the powerhouse. For Thorne's new condos. He cut corners on the foundation survey. The river floods there every 20 years. He knows. I made sure he knew the letter was a shield. It was a weapon. It was a map. And it was a transfer of title, not of property, but of purpose. Leo stood up, the letter in his hand. The despair was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. He was not going to run. He was going to fight. He slid the new glove onto his left hand. Fit perfectly. He now had a pair. He walked over to the maintenance locker, a tall, rusted cabinet he'd ignored until now. The key slid into the lock and turned smoothly. Inside, just as the letter promised, was a roll of blueprints and a thin file folder. The file contained a copy of a geological survey report, detailing the instability of the riverbank on the proposed condo site. And clipped to it was a signed receipt for delivery of the report to Thorne Development, dated 6 months ago. Silas had left him everything he needed. He had not just left him a legacy of kindness. He had left him the tools to defend it. The final town hall meeting was scheduled for the 29th day. The room was packed. Mr. Thorne was at the front, standing beside a glossy architectural model of his Riverbend Vista condominiums. He spoke smoothly, his voice resonating with confidence and reason. He talked about progress, about tax revenues, about creating a modern, vibrant future for the town. He gestured dismissively toward the corner of the model where the powerhouse would be. And we will begin by removing that dangerous, unsightly ruin, that relic of a bygone era, and turning this neglected riverfront into a jewel. The council members nodded along, their minds clearly already made up. The audience was mostly quiet, resigned. It was the way things were. Money and progress always won. When Thorne finished his presentation, the councilman, Mr. Peters, cleared his throat. Does anyone wish to speak in opposition to the motion to demolish Parcel 734? The room was silent. Leo stood up. A murmur went through the crowd. He looked small and out of place in his clean but worn work clothes, a smudge of grease still on his cheek. He walked to the front of the room, not to the podium, but to an empty table he had requested. On it, he placed one of the metal boxes from the boiler. Thorne watched him, a look of amused pity on his face. "Son, I know you have an attachment to that old place," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But you have to be realistic." Leo didn't look at him. He opened the box. "I'm not here to talk about my building," he said, his voice quiet but clear, carrying through the silent room. "I'm here to talk about our town, and about the debts we owe." He reached into the box and pulled out the small, brass bird. "My first witness is an object made for Sarah Jenkins," he said, holding it up. "In April of 1995, after she lost her voice to illness in the middle of the room, an older woman with gray hair gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. People turned to look at her. She was Sarah Jenkins. She hadn't sung in the church choir for 20 years. Leo then pulled out the perfectly balanced hammer. "This was for Mark Soloway," he said, "when he was trying to start his carpentry business and couldn't afford good tools." A man in the back of the room, broad-shouldered and flour-dusted from his day's work, stood up slowly. "My God," he whispered. "I found that on my bench. I thought my dad left it for me before he passed." Leo continued, his voice growing stronger with each object he presented. He pulled out a complex, geared mechanism. "This is a new escapement for the town clock, delivered in the middle of the night to old Mr. Abernathy, the clock winder, because the town couldn't afford the official part." He read the names. He showed the objects, and with each one, a new person in the crowd would stir, a memory would surface, a quiet mystery from their past would suddenly be solved. The room was no longer silent. It was filled with whispers, with gasps of recognition, with the dawning, collective realization of the secret life of Silas Blackwood. He was not the town hermit. He was the town's anonymous heart. Marge, from the diner, stood up, her voice cutting through the noise. "It was Silas," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It was always Silas. He fixed my gate. He repaired the school's flagpole. He never took a dime. He just paid his debts." The mood in the room had shifted entirely. It was no longer a zoning meeting. It was a wake. It was a reckoning. The townspeople were looking at each other, seeing the invisible threads of kindness and care that had connected them all. Threads spun by a man they had dismissed as an eccentric recluse. They were not just a collection of individuals. They were a community that had been cared for, and they hadn't even known it. Finally, Leo looked directly at Councilman Peters. He held up a small, exquisitely stitched leather wallet. "And this," he said, his voice dropping, "was for you, Mr. Peters, after your son lost his tuition money before heading off to college." The councilman stared at the wallet, his face pale. He remembered the panic, the shame, and then the miraculous appearance of the wallet in his mailbox the next day, the cash still inside. He had assumed his son had just misplaced it. Now he knew the truth. Thorne, seeing he had lost control of the room, stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. It's a touching story, a fairy tale, but it has nothing to do with a dangerous, collapsing building. The law is the law. The motion stands." "You're right," Leo said calmly. "Let's talk about the law. And let's talk about your new condos." He walked over to the podium and unrolled the blueprints Silas had left him. He held up the geological survey. "This is a report which you signed for 6 months ago, Mr. Thorne, stating that the land you want to build on is unstable and lies in a 20-year floodplain. A fact you have failed to disclose to this council or to your potential investors, He looked at the stunned faces of the council members. You want to tear down a building that is a monument to one man's integrity, so you can build another that is a monument to your own greed and dishonesty. The room erupted. Thorne stood frozen, his polished facade shattered, exposed. The vote to condemn the Powerhouse was unanimously rejected. The motion to open an investigation into Thorne Development's practices was unanimously approved. Leo had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a promise kept. As the meeting broke up, people crowded around Leo, touching his arm, thanking him, sharing their own stories of mysterious repairs and unexpected gifts. The town had remembered itself. It had remembered its heart. In the back of the room, a figure stood alone, watching him. It was his mother. Her face was streaked with tears. She didn't approach him. She just looked at him, a look of profound shame and dawning pride, and then she turned and slipped out the door. The fight was over, but the real work, was just beginning. In the days that followed the town hall meeting, something remarkable began to happen. The Powerhouse, once a symbol of the town's decay, became its center. It started with Mark Soloway, the carpenter. He showed up the next morning with a truck full of lumber and a crew of 2. Figured we owed the place a new roof, he said, not quite meeting Leo's eyes. He didn't have to. The debt was understood. Soon after, an electrician arrived, a woman whose father's antique radio Silas had repaired 30 years earlier. She offered to rewire the entire building, free of charge. The local mason came to inspect the brickwork, pointing out the solid, masterful construction and offering to spend his weekends repointing the mortar. People just started showing up. Some brought tools, some brought food. Teenagers who had once thrown rocks at the windows now came with buckets and sponges to clean them. The community, awakened to the legacy in its midst, began to repay its collective debt to Silas Blackwood, not with money, but with the work of their own hands. They were not just restoring a building. They were restoring their own story. Leo became the quiet conductor of this symphony of renewal. He moved with a new confidence, directing the work, sharing the stories from the ledgers, and making sure every repair was done with the same care and respect that Silas would have shown. The Powerhouse was slowly, painstakingly, coming back to life. It would not generate electricity again, but it was generating something far more valuable. Community, purpose, a shared sense of place. One afternoon, as Leo was sorting through a pile of salvaged copper wiring, he saw his mother walking up the long gravel drive. She was alone. She carried a bucket and a set of cleaning rags. She looked uncertain, her hands twisting the handle of the bucket. He stopped what he was doing and waited. She came to a halt a few feet in front of him, unable to meet his gaze. "I heard what you did," she said, her voice barely a whisper. At the meeting, he just nodded. "Richard, he left," she continued, finally looking up. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. "He said this town was full of sentimental fools. He didn't understand." "I didn't understand." A long silence stretched between them, filled with the sounds of hammers on wood and the distant murmur of the river. "I was wrong, Leo," she said, the words coming out in a rush of shame. "I was scared. After your father died, I just wanted everything to be easy, simple. And you were a reminder of how hard it was, of what I'd lost. That wasn't fair. I let a weak man convince me to push away the strongest person I knew." She held up the bucket. "I don't know if you can forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I'd like to help. I can scrub floors. I can start there." Leo looked at his mother, really looked at her, for the first time in a year. He saw not the woman who had kicked him out, but a woman who was lost and trying to find her way back. He saw the grief she had tried to bury under a new life, a new husband. He thought of Silas's ledger, of all the entries that spoke of second chances and quiet repairs. He walked over and took the bucket from her hands. "The floors in the office are pretty dirty," he said, his voice gentle. "We can start there." Together, they worked side by side that afternoon, in a silence that was no longer strained and painful, but comfortable, companionable. It was a beginning, a new corner to make right. As the Powerhouse was being physically restored, Leo took on the task of restoring its soul. He decided the building wouldn't be a private workshop, but a public trust. He, along with Marge and a few other town elders, formed a foundation to turn the Powerhouse into a working museum and a community workshop. A place where the skills of craft and repair could be passed down. A library of Silas's work and a school for his philosophy. The metal boxes and their contents became the central exhibit, each object displayed with its story, a testament to a quiet man's extraordinary life. Mr. Thorne's development project collapsed under the weight of the investigation and public outrage. He sold his holdings and left town, a man undone not by a powerful rival, but by a 19-year-old boy and the ghost of an old caretaker. The riverbank he had wanted to build on remained wild and undeveloped, a quiet monument to his failed greed. The seasons turned. The hole in the Powerhouse roof was patched. The windows were all reglazed. The great turbine hall, once a cavern of decay, was now clean and bright, filled with workbenches, lathes, and drill presses donated by people from all over the county who had heard the story. Cinder, now gray-muzzled and content, had his own bed right by the boiler, the undisputed guardian of the place. Leo lived in the small apartment he and his mother had built in the upper levels of the Powerhouse, a warm, comfortable space with a view of the river. His mother managed the small cafe they opened in the front of the building, serving Marge's recipes and becoming a warm, central figure in the community she had once felt alienated from. Their relationship, like the building, had been restored through humble, shared labor. It was not perfect, scarred by the past, but it was strong, built on a new foundation of honesty and respect. Leo had found his place. He was no longer a loose thread. He was woven into the fabric of the town, a steward of its most important story. He spent his days in the workshop teaching kids how to weld, how to read a blueprint, how to respect a tool. He taught them what Silas had taught him through his work, that mending what is broken is a noble act, that the world is worth repairing, not replacing. One late autumn afternoon, a year after the town hall meeting, a beat-up moving van sputtered to a halt just outside the Powerhouse gates, a plume of steam billowing from its hood. A young family got out, a father, a mother, and a small girl. They looked tired, stressed. The anxiety of a cross-country move compounded by a breakdown. The father kicked the tire in frustration. Leo watched them from the workshop door. He saw their predicament, saw the weariness in their posture. He disappeared back into the workshop. The sounds of a grinder and a welding torch could be heard for a few minutes. Then he emerged, wiping his hands on a rag. He walked over to the stranded family. He was carrying a small, custom-fabricated metal part, a water pump flange still warm to the touch. He didn't say much. He just pointed to the engine. "That's probably your problem," he said. "This should fix it." The father looked at him, bewildered. How did you know? How much do I owe you?" Leo just shook his head. He set the perfectly machined part on the hood of the van, a small offering of grace to a stranger. He gave the man a simple nod, a gesture of understanding that needed no words. He then turned and walked back toward the great brick building, the setting sun casting his long shadow before him. Cinder limped faithfully at his side, his loyal companion. The light caught the old brick, making it glow with a warm, golden light. A debt is just a story that isn't finished. And this one, Leo knew, was just beginning. He had found his corner, and he was making it right. The story would go on.
Okay. I do want to make that trash side TV. Garden Terrace is really nice too. I'm so grateful. I feel so much better now. Oh, that's great, Summer. do... Oh, I wonder if it's because... Nope, never mind. Alright, well, either way, we'll go say hi to Ninetales. Garden Terrace is so cute. Garden Terrace is really cute. I think we have a good setup for it, though. I'll just have to go there and rearrange it. Who's over in purple? Ellie, Hard Eyes, Nelly, Emma, a bunch of people. Koopy, not the roll call. But yeah, a lot of people are over on purple. Okay, not gonna lie, this does look really epic. Okay. Oh wait, there's a photo op? Oh, never mind. Ninetales needing so much fire is on brand. It kind of is. Love Ninetales so much. Keaton vibes, for sure. So I think our environment level went up. Yes. Congratulations, level 7. Thanks, Josser Beth. Appreciate it. Okay. Pop art lamp. Interesting. Okay. Thanks for the follow. 22, 34, 67, 899. You think you're 7 also? Nice. Is anyone else here? No. Okay. Let's go check out the terrace before we go pick up some stuff from Pallet Town.